Jerry was a builder. He lived in a suburb of a very large city, so there was always plenty of construction work for an honest man. Jerry made a lot of money. He was able to purchase a 30-acre farm. He built a luxurious home for his wife and their 6 sons. People drove by his house just to look at how fabulous it was. As his sons grew up and married, Jerry built each of his sons and their wives a beautiful home on 5 acres of his property because he loved them so much. Jerry's son followed in their father's footsteps, eventually taking over Jerry's thriving construction company. At the age of 70, Jerry's wife died, and he began to slow down, and the mansion was lonely, and it was so big and just too much to keep up. He had always dreamed of retiring up north in the woods where he could be close to nature, so he found a little house that was 1,000 miles north of his farm. He loved his family so much, but he felt that they needed to be on their own. So as a final gift, Jerry remodeled his mansion into a clubhouse for his sons, put in a swimming pool, had a tennis court. Even though his grandchildren were babies and toddlers, he thought of the things they would like all their life. He then divided his fortune among his sons and his grandchildren. Then, with tears in his eyes, he moved away up north. Each week, he wrote a letter to one of his sons or his grandchildren, but he never heard back. He assumed that the construction business was booming and it was consuming their time, and they were too busy to write. And he didn't want to force himself on his family, but no word from them caused him great sadness. He longed to see them, but he wouldn't return to visit them uninvited. 10 years passed. Jerry had turned 80 when he finally got a letter in the mail, and it was an invitation. And it said, "You are invited to our annual Christmas reunion, December 24, 7 p.m. sharp." He was so excited. Finally, he was invited back to his own home, to his own family again. He loved them so much, he could hardly wait. He spent the next 2 weeks buying as many Christmas gifts as he could squeeze into his car. His grandchildren had been babies and toddlers when he left. He tried to anticipate the kinds of gifts teenagers would like, and buying for 24 people was no small task, but it was very satisfying. Finally, he got into his car. He began the 1,000-mile drive. It took him 2 full days of driving. But when he arrived at the mansion where he used to live and saw the lights of his beautiful former home, he was thrilled with happiness. He almost started to cry as he knocked on the front door. When his son opened the door, Jerry shouted, "My son, I'm so happy to see you." He threw his arms around him, patting his back, and he kept saying, my son, it's been so long." But his son pulled back, stepped away, and said, "Who are you?" Jerry said, "I'm your father. Don't you recognize me?" Music and laughter filled the mansion behind his son. Jerry could hear the gaiety of the Christmas being celebrated. Another son came to the hall and spoke up and said, "Our father left here 10 years ago. We haven't heard from him since. We don't recognize you, and we didn't invite you. As you can see, we're in the middle of a big family and friends Christmas. Please leave." Jerry was speechless. The entryway of the house began filling with the other sons and their wives, all staring at him like he was a stranger in his own home. Again, Jerry said, "But I'm your father. I've been writing letters to each of you for 10 years. Didn't you get them?" Another son said, "We got no letters from our father. Every year we got letters from an imposter. He claimed to be our father. He was trying to weasel his way into our lives to get our money. You're just another imposter, and you need to leave now." Just then, the grandchildren rushed from the Christmas party into the entranceway, yelling, "It's Grandpa! It's Grandpa! We sent you an invitation, and you came." His eyes filled with tears as they threw their arms around him. How good it felt just to be welcomed. But their parents were unmoved. "He's not your grandpa. Your grandpa doesn't exist anymore. He's an imposter." Sadly, Jerry dropped his arms. He stared at his family. He searched their eyes for a hint of kindness or recognition. After an awkward moment, he said, "Am I not welcome in my own family?" A younger son again spoke up and said, "This is not your family. This is not your home. And no, you aren't welcome here." Jerry said, "But I've come from so far away. All I want to do is share my love with you. I have a whole car full of gifts. Will you not just accept my gifts? The grandchildren are, please, please, let us have the gifts." But the parents were shaking their heads no. If we accept the gifts, he's going to want something from us. Besides, we're right in the midst of our Christmas celebration. All our friends are waiting in the ballroom. With tears in his voice, Jerry tried to explain, I only want to give you the gifts and enjoy your company for a little while." But the sons shook their head, and one son reached out and quietly shut the big door of the mansion in Jerry's face. Jerry turned and walked to his car. He stopped and looked back at the door that had been closed behind him, and he said to himself, "How can I walk away from them? I love them so much." He bowed his head and prayed, "Lord, how can I get my own family to receive me?" There was silence. He got into his car. He picked up his Bible that he had left lying on the passenger seat. He opened it to the book of Luke, chapter 2, where he had been reading the Christmas story. He read it again. This time, the words seemed to jump off the page at him, where it said of Mary and Joseph, there was no room for them in the inn. It didn't say there was no room in the inn. It said there was no room for them in the inn. Jerry thought, now that's true of me. But he thought, I've got it worse than Mary and Joseph. They were not welcomed by strangers. I'm not welcome in my own home, by my own family. He kept reading. Turn to the book of John, to chapter 1, where John wrote about Jesus coming into the world that first Christmas. Again, the words seemed to leap off the page as he read John 1, verse 5, that light shines in darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Jerry thought, the light shines in darkness, but the darkness doesn't understand it. And then he thought, maybe my sons didn't really reject me. Maybe they were just confused by my presence. I wonder how many people in our world are confused by the presence of Jesus. Maybe they don't understand because nobody's ever explained it. He kept reading until he got to John 1, verse 10. It says, he was in the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. Jerry said, just like me. I purchased the land with my own money. I built that home with my own hands, and I'm not welcome by my own children. Then he felt a stab in his heart as he read John 1, verse 11. He came to his own did not receive him. Jerry thought, how many times have I read that and never realized the hurt and pain wrapped up in those words? This is what Jesus went through. He wasn't welcome in his own home, just like me. Then Jerry began to smile as he read John 1:12. To all who received him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. What a privilege to belong to the royal family, to be the child of the King of the universe, and to recognize him. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, John 10:27. And Jerry thought, this describes my grandchildren perfectly. As soon as they saw me, they recognized me. Somehow they knew the sound of my voice and what I would be like, and they instinctively loved me, just like I loved them. They're my true family. All who receive Jesus Christ into their hearts will behave just like my grandchildren did when they saw me. He thought, maybe Jesus is like a Christmas gift. God wraps him up, puts him in a box, puts him under the tree, just for us. But then, it doesn't do us any good unless we receive it, open it, and enjoy it to the fullest. Yes, we have to receive him. We have to enjoy him to the fullest. This is the good news of Christ's gift of love at Christmas. Well, that Christmas Eve, Jerry slept out in his car in the driveway of the mansion he had built. The next morning, as usual, the youngest ones woke up first, quietly snuck downstairs, looked at the Christmas tree and all the presents under it. And they were so excited until they looked outside and they saw the old man sleeping in the car. One grandchild said, I know that's my grandpa. Don't care what my mom and dad say, I'm going out to wish him Merry Christmas. And another one said, I'm going with you. And so all they quietly put on their boots and their hats and their gloves and their coats, ran out into the snow and knocked on the door and woke up the old man. About an hour later, the parents were awakened by the sound of laughter. They looked out their windows, and there was this old man giving his entire carload of gifts to children. Paper strewn all over the driveway. They're laughing and singing and playing. The children had never seemed happier. One son rushed outside and said to the old man, you need to leave now. The children said, why? Why? Why does Grandpa have to leave? The son said, I've told you he is not your grandpa. You must leave now. Funny thing was, Jerry wasn't angry. He wasn't even upset. He gathered the grandchildren and hugged them, and he said, you have given me the most wonderful Christmas I've ever had. Thank you for letting me enjoy your company. One day I will return, and when I do, I will bring gifts to you more wonderful than you can imagine. Well, here we are, 10 days before Christmas. And a week later, it'll be over, making Satan very, very happy. This is the holiday Satan hates. We're told, in the spirit of prophecy, Satan had been working to make the gulf deep and impassable between earth and heaven. By his falsehoods, he had emboldened men in sin. It was his purpose to wear out the forbearance of God, to extinguish his love for man, so that God would abandon the world to satanic jurisdiction. Desire of Ages, page 32. However, in heaven's council, the hour for the coming of Christ had been determined. When the great clock of time pointed to that hour, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Providence had directed the movements of nations and the tide of human impulse and influence until the world was ripe for the coming of the deliverer. The deception of sin had reached its height. The Son of God, looking upon the world, beheld suffering and misery. In the 1800s, Cardinal John Henry Newman was the most preeminent leader of the Catholic Church in Great Britain and Europe. One day, he received a message from a priest in the tiny village of Brennan, a little mill town north of Birmingham. An epidemic of cholera had decimated the village. He was requesting another priest be sent to assist him in administering the last rites and conducting funerals. People were dying faster than he could conduct the funerals. Cardinal Newman read the letter from the priest and then sat thinking in his office. He then spent the next hour in prayer. Finally, his secretary interrupted him and said, "Cardinal Newman, we must send immediate help. Which priest are you going to send?" Cardinal Newman said, "The people are suffering and dying. How can I send a priest to do this work? Under the circumstances, I must go myself." Jesus looked down on dying people, decimated by pride, ego, selfishness, preoccupied with the sins of the world, and he said, under the circumstances, I must go myself. And John 1:14 tells us why. He said, the Word became flesh. He made his dwelling among us. Why? Because he loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Christmas. Why did Jesus step into our world as a man? His becoming part of humanity is about a love so unfathomable that it's impossible for us to grasp it. It's about a salvation that most people don't even want. We're doing fine. We're in the midst of a party. We didn't invite you. Please leave. But the most amazing thing is that God loves us anyway, that there's nothing we can say, nothing we can do that will ever change his love for us. John 4:10 says, this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Love so strong that Jesus created a rescue plan for us. Just like Marie Kriessman. She was a Polish Jew who during World War II was rounded up along with thousands of others and put to work in the forced labor in a German Volkswagen factory. They were making war tanks. She was pregnant when she was forced out of her home, away from her husband, and she soon gave birth to a baby boy. The baby was immediately taken from her, sent to the Volkswagen Children's Home. She was told to forget him. She would never be allowed to see him or visit him. One night, a few weeks later, in desperation, she snuck out of the camp, hiked 8 miles to the children's home. If she were caught, it would mean instant death. But the next day, she posed as a children's home worker and soon found her son's name on a crib in the infant ward. He was skin and bones. She kidnapped her own child and literally walked away and never, ever came back. She kept walking and hiding, and remarkably was never caught. Of the 300 children who entered that Volkswagen Children's Home, only this one was rescued, and was rescued by a mother who was willing to die rather than lose her son. Desire of Ages, page 38 says, at the very crisis when Satan seemed about to triumph, the Son of God came as our ambassador of divine grace. Marie Kriessman represents that passionate love of God that caused him to send his only Son into this world on a rescue mission. That rescue mission is to save you and me. How thankful we should be that Jesus had a rescue plan, that he stepped into history to carry it out. A man was walking home from his office through the town park one evening when he heard muffled screams coming from behind a clump of bushes. Alarmed, he slowed down to listen and panicked when he realized that he was hearing the unmistakable sounds of a struggle, heavy grunting, frantic scruffling, and tearing of fabric. Only yards from where he stood, he realized a woman was being attacked. He froze in his steps, hardly daring to breathe. He didn't want the attacker to notice him, but then a strange, strong impression came on him to get involved now. Frightened for his own safety, he cursed himself for having worked late that night. He had a family and responsibilities. What if the attacker killed him? He instantly had the urge to run and use his cell phone to call the police. But he could hear the struggle becoming more desperate. And the impression to help was overwhelming. An eternity seemed to pass as he argued with himself, but it had only taken a few seconds. He could hear the girl continue to struggle, and he had to decide fast. How could he sleep that night if he walked away from this? He finally resolved he could not turn his back on the fate of this woman, even if he were killed, even if it meant his life. He was not brave, he was not athletic, but he nonetheless summoned up all the moral courage and physical strength he could muster. Once he had determined to help the girl, he became strangely transformed. He ran behind the bushes with a startling scream as loud as he could to stop it, stop it. The stunned attacker turned towards him, and he kicked the knife out of the man's hand, and then he kicked the man in the stomach as hard as he could, landing on his backside. It seemed to him that God had given him amazing strength as the attacker fled into the darkness of the night. Panting hard, he scrambled upright and he went around the bush to approach the sobbing girl. He couldn't see her outline, but he could certainly sense her trembling shock. Not wanting to frighten her father, he said very softly, "It's okay, young lady. Your attacker ran away. You're safe now." There was a long pause. The girl sat up and uttered in amazement, "Daddy, is that you?" There in the darkness sat his youngest daughter. What if her father had decided not to become involved? With pity, God saw how men had become victims of satanic cruelty. It was demonstrated before the universe that apart from God, humanity could not be uplifted. A new element of life and power must be imparted by Him who made the world. Under the circumstances, Jesus said, "I must go." With intense interest, the unfallen worlds had watched to see Jehovah arise and sweep away the inhabitants of the earth. But instead of destroying the world, God sent His Son to save it. Desire of Ages, page 38. You know, many say, Jesus is the reason for the season. It's cute and it rhymes, but it's not biblical. Think about it. Jesus is not the reason for the season. Sin is the reason for the season. With all the lights and gifts and partying and laughter, it's easy to forget that Christmas is only one small part of the plan of salvation. Not only did God send His Son into the world to defeat our attacker, He also died for our sins, rose from the grave, and now serves as our high priest in heaven, all because we're His family, and He can't bear to part with us. You know, when Jesus came the first time, the wise men had to go searching for Him. And then people listened to Him, and they wondered if He was really who He said He was. Then they crucified Him, believing they had won a victory. But at His trial, He stood there before His crucifixion, and He said in Matthew 26:64, "Hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, coming in the clouds of glory." And I want to tell you, there will be no questions about who He is when He comes this time. Oh, if we could only catch a glimpse of how precious every single one of us is to God, and the lengths to which Jesus will go to become involved in our lives. If we catch even a tiny glimpse of God's passionate love, of His grace for each of us, then that love that brought Him into the world that first Christmas so long ago will prepare us to behold Him face to face, because He's coming. He's coming soon.